And we are live. So, well, hello everyone, and thanks for joining to this Uroboros event today. Seeing design research and experimental murmuration. I'm very excited to be hosting this event, and I will introduce everyone involved in a second. But first, I would like to just throw out there some words of honest gratitude to our sponsors. Because the festival has been supported with funds provided by the Abacus Foundation, the Slovak Arts Council, and the City of Prague. Also, I would like to remind you that you are very welcome to use our Discord channel for the discussion. The link, I'm gonna paste in the chat immediately. It is this one. And you know that all the discussions that we have there are permanent, and we can keep on discussing even after the event is over. You are also, of course, free to use the Zoom chat if you wish. So without further ado, I would like to, and it is my pleasure and an honor to introduce you to David Green, Joseph Lindley, and Zach Mason. They are all researchers, artists, and designers working in Imagination Lancaster, a research institute in the United Kingdom. And today they are going to be presenting us Murmuration, an online world where the medium is the message, the journey is the destinations, fictions are factual, and most things are there by design. I love that introduction. The landscape, and you will see more about this in a second. The landscape is based on a pictorial manuscript entitled Ways of Seeing Design Research that was created by the artists as a reflection on the state of the art of design research. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Enrique. Thank you. Morning, everyone, our audience in Zoom and anyone watching elsewhere. So I'm going to just explain a little bit more about who we are and why we're doing this kind of thing, which hopefully will make the murmuration itself make a bit more sense and contextualize it. So this is all part of a project that I'm running called Design Research Works, and this is a 4-year fellowship. So I've got 4 years to run this project. And really it's about promoting design research and arguing the case for why design research is an important thing and a relevant idea. And I'll sort of dig right into that immediately. By design research, what do we even mean? It's quite a broad term. And a lot of the things at Uroboros, I think, arguably are design research, but a lot of them they look a little bit like art as well, or a performance. So what do we mean by this? The shorthand version of that is learning by making something. An analogy I use is if you have some kind of new material, like let's say concrete, and you don't know anything about that material, if you get your hands dirty with it and mess around with it and experiment, after a few hours, you will have learned something new about it. Now, design research does precisely that, but with whatever it is you can design. And a lot of the work, a lot of the things we're looking at and the things we're designing are really to do with people and technology. So we can create designed experiments at the intersection of where people and technology meet one another and hopefully learn something new about both aspects. And that's why I think design research is a really, really important idea right now. And that's why I managed to persuade the UK research funding bodies to give me the money to run this project for 4 years. So that's kind of a little bit of the background. Then the paper, Dave will talk about in more detail, but it was one of our very early pieces of work. And we're just trying to, with ways of seeing design research, understand the multiple perspectives there are on this same thing. Because although I gave the fairly simple example of concrete, there are many multiple concurrent perspectives on how the design bit works, how the research bit works, and how he might bring these things together. So I think, Dave, do you want to take over and just talk about the history of this murmuration and where it came from and how we got to where we are?
I do indeed. Yes. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Joe, for handing over. It's really nice to be here. I just want to say before I start talking, this has been such a fun festival, and Enrique and your colleagues have done such a cool job of presenting it in a way that looks really, really nice. So just want to add some props for that before I start. So yeah, Joe's talked a bit about Design Research Works, which is his project. And I joined this right at the start, but it was really kind of new territory for me. And I've learned an awful lot about design research over the last 6 months on this project. And it's been exactly by getting my hands dirty, as the metaphor Joe used. And one of the dirtiest my hands have ever been in this project so far has been working on the paper that sort of started as the sort of genesis of this project, which, as Joe said, was called Ways of Seeing Design Research. And this just started off as a conversation really between Joe, Enrique, and myself, talking about, well, design research and how we all see it in different ways. And I think maybe that's the way the conversation started. But I think very early on we drew a sort of analogy with the work by John Berger, the television series from the 1970s called Ways of Seeing, which was really about how important it is to read art and design in the context in which it's been made. So looking at the sort of social and cultural factors that affect how works of art and works of design get made. And so we channeled a lot of our energy into sort of interpreting that work and thinking about how the ways of seeing metaphor can be applied to design research, and how that might be a sort of a way out of some of the confusion about what design research is. And so we started to pull together these ideas and form them into a pictorial. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with the format, a pictorial is a bit like an academic paper, but it's comprised not so much of words, but of a combination of words, diagrams, pictures, photographs, sketches, whatever. And if anybody has already been in the Gather Town that we'll take you to in a moment, then you'll have seen some of those laid out. Now, when we were putting this together, we were all really excited about it, and we really enjoyed the process. And I think it really, for us, there were some really rich sort of discovery moments. There was lots of sort of eureka moments as we were talking about this stuff. And so we were really excited to pull it together, and we wrote this pictorial and we submitted it to the ACM conference on designing interactive systems in February this year. And we were really excited to get the reviews back, because we were like, people are going to absolutely love this paper. It's so good. And we still hold by that, but the reviews came back and the reviews were not good. Well, they weren't terrible, but we felt like the reviewers didn't share our enthusiasm for this work, which, we were disappointed by, but life goes on. And so we thought, well, there are other ways that we can get these thoughts and ideas out there. And of course, Uroboros is so far our best opportunity to connect these ideas with people. So here we are, and here you are. And yeah, we basically just hope that some of the effort and the energy we put into this work will connect with you. And how we hope that will work is we've essentially translated this pictorial into a completely new format. And we've run with this idea of the murmuration. Now, if anybody's been lucky enough to see a murmuration of starlings, it's this beautiful kind of flowing movement of birds up in the air. And what's remarkable about it is, or one of the many things that's remarkable about it for me, is that it's somehow, you can see the individual trajectories of all these birds as individuals, but together they create this incredible sort of fluid movement, and it almost seems like it takes on a life of its own. It's a real synthesis of all of these flight trajectories. And our ambition, I think, for this is to try and bring as many people as we can muster into a shared social space as best we can, given the current circumstances, and just try and see what happens when we're all in the same place, looking at the same kinds of materials and thinking about design research. And we developed something that tries to accommodate that. and that is in a platform called GatherTown, which is a bit like a video conferencing system, but it's also a little bit like Zelda, or the original Zelda, where you have a little avatar and you scroll around and you can walk around a map. And in a moment, I think we'll probably go there. But just to give it a little bit of more background on why we did that, for a similar conference to the DIS conference, a conference called CHI, which is the Computer Human Interaction Conference, Joe and I and a couple of our other colleagues from Lancaster created a thing which we called the Egg, which was a platform. Well, it's hard to explain it in so many words, but it's essentially a place where we can gather, and it's like a kind of it's a world built in GatherTown where people can go. And anyway, you'll get a better idea of what GatherTown means in a moment. But the wonderful thing about that Egg project is that we built this thing, and so many random sort of coincidences happen in there. I bumped into people I'd never met before and had some really nice conversations. And it was fun to just build it, and it was fun to run around it. And I think we just wanted to sort of bring some of that, some of those ideas into this. So without much further ado, I suggest we en masse head over to our GatherTown space, and we can give you a guided tour essentially. And I think that might be the place to leave it. And we can have a chat in there. We can continue the conversation. As much as I love hogging the limelight, it would be nice to turn this into a bit of a discussion. So
sounds good, Dave.
There's a link, I believe, in the chat.
Yeah, I put the link in the chat.
There is. If you keep the Zoom alive for a minute, I could try and share the web address as well. Is that useful? Like, just put it on the screen.
The other thing to say about this Murmuration, before we all sort of go in there and maybe then thereafter go off separate ways, is what we've built into this one that we haven't built into any of our GatherTown experiments in the past is a mechanism for leaving feedback in various ways. So there are 3 portals to rooms where you can leave responses in the form of video, audio, or text. And so in case we don't get this opportunity to invite you to do that again, then please hunt those down. And if you feel so inclined, leave us a message. We definitely will read it, and we will definitely appreciate it if you do.
There is the web address for anyone who happened to be watching on a stream. So write that down and head over there. I guess I'm going to have to not show that for more than a couple more seconds, but there it is.
All right.
See you there.
So see you there.
Yep. See you there.
Moving there.
Bye.
and would like a guided tour, the next tour will commence in 1 minute and will depart from the bit of the page that says Ways of Seeing Design Research, which is right in the middle. So if anybody wants a tour, you can go and meet me there. Hello, P and Uroboros. I am just typing a little message in to let everybody know that we're here. So we might have to wait a minute or two just for any more people to show up, and then we can get cracking.
That's nice. But how do I can I explore in the mini map? Like I can see the mini map, but I don't know how to go to a particular place using it. Oh, it's not done.
In the mini map.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we are.
So you can.
Party!
Yay.
All right.
And
Yeah,
dance.
we'll explain it on the tour.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Well, we have a little bit of a critical mass here. I think this is 7 of us, is it?
I'm dancing.
That's okay. So let's do a little dance before we get started. If everybody presses and holds the Z key on their keyboard, then we'll all start dancing.
Which key?
The Z key, or Z in some cultures.
Okay.
Yay.
All right. If anybody gets lost at any point, you can click on the little participants icon in the bottom left on your interface, and it'll bring up a list of everybody in the room. And if you click on Dave Green and then click follow, it will automatically bring you to me, or you can click locate on map, and it'll create a big line that you can follow yourself. All right. So let's begin. So where we are now is the title page of the paper that we wrote, or the pictorial rather, and the post-it notes that you can see are some of the comments that we got back from our reviewers, these nasty reviewers that we love really, but they said mean things about our paper. So we paraphrased them. They didn't say mean things. Their criticisms were mostly quite fair. But we've paraphrased them and written them on these post-it notes. So if you ever see a post-it note, that's something that a reviewer said about our paper. So I won't go through all the text on the paper because we'll be here all day. But I'll just give you a very quick tour of maybe take about 5-10 minutes. And then you can go off if you want, or you can explore, or you can even run off mid-tour. There's no, it's not compulsory to follow us around. But
Dave, maybe explain we can go and visit them, but explain the search engine idea as well.
Search engine idea.
You know, the three things that we did.
Yes, well, that's maybe where we can start, actually. So the structure of the paper is this: from left to right is basically the order that we did things. So all the stuff on the far left is how we began, and then we worked our way through the project to the stuff that's on the right hand side. But the way that we organise the paper is different. So the reading line of the paper, i.e. the structure of the arguments, is quite linear. But the way we'll show you the order of the work is, if you follow me to the left, I'll show you the 3 databases that we came up with and unpack them a bit.
I think Enrique actually went into a portal.
You do fall in portals sometimes, don't you?
Yeah, careful you don't fall in a portal. Portals are normally the little circles, or the ones that are sort of hollow circles. All right, so basically the way we started this project was so we're talking about ways of seeing design research. The sort of open gambit for us was to think about how a database of design research might look, or might function, or might be conceived of. And we, recognizing that Joe, Enrique, and I probably had different sort of skills and interests and whatever and approaches to this, we kind of went our separate ways briefly and came up with three ideas for a database. And there was no particularly coherent brief for this, but it was just like, what might a database look like? And this top one is basically what I came up with, because I've been really interested in these. If you follow me to the right, careful to avoid the portals. These diagrams of film narratives, which range from the sort of fairly coherent sort of linear 3-arc structure to some of Christopher, what's his name, who made
Nolan.
Christopher Nolan, who likes to play around with sort of slightly time travel-y concepts in his movies, and thereby, has flashbacks and flash forwards and things that create paradoxes and stuff. That was just something that really interested me in terms of thinking about speculative design, which is a sort of projection of the future. But the thing that interested me about that was that as we move forward in time, those future projections kind of get further and further into the past, and that in itself creates a sort of slight time travel paradox, which is epitomized in this diagrammatical representation of the film Primer, which is the ultimate paradoxical time travel movie. And so one of the things that I thought was interesting about that is if we overlay if we come up with a way of representing this kind of this way of looking at different perspectives through time, there's a thing called the futures cone, which is this thing here, which is a way of representing sort of preferential or plausible or possible futures from a moment in time. And that cone itself moves through time. And this idea here was a sort of example of how that might be represented in the case of a single project. And then the feather of future speculation, which is the yellow thing to the right, is basically what happens if you put all of these individual projects on top of each other. And for me, the interesting thing about that was that was a way of looking, or a way of seeing, the sort of total history of design research and its tendency to speculate about the future, which is the sort of general brush effect of everything facing forward. So anyway, that was just a sort of series of ideas thrown onto paper as a starting point for the project. And maybe if we move down, anybody's got any questions about this, by the way, just chip in. If we move down, then I'm trapped. I actually can't move.
You can use
okay.
press down G, it turns you into, you can walk through walls.
Cool.
Ghost mode.
So here we are at sort of database idea number 2. Maybe Joe, do you want to explain this since it was yours?
Yeah, I can do. I'll spotlight myself. So this one, Dave's was super exciting to me. One, because he made it look beautiful, and secondarily, the strange kind of temporality aspect of it. Like when you mess with time, things are always super, super interesting. I went with a really boring thing. I was just trying to imagine if a stuffy, old school, traditional organization like the ACM, which is the mothership that runs all of these computing conferences, if they set up a kind of search engine for design research work specifically, then what would it look like? And I tried to imagine that, and that's what you see in this kind of prototype to your right. And it does reference a few bits of research out there. I mean, that this part where I'm standing is talking about entry points, and that's imagining design fiction, which is just one of the ways of doing design research. It imagines it as a world building exercise, and if you build a world for design fiction, each artifact you have is an entry point. So I thought it'd be interesting to be able to search the database of design research examples by how many entry points they had, and also by the different types of media. So that's what this box here is for. There's also this Borgesness, which is a slider you can choose, which will bring back results which are either obviously fiction, like obviously speculation and fake, versus things that look super, super real. Because that's another characteristic of this design research stuff. It deliberately tries to appear to be real, even though it's not. James Auger's Audio Tooth was a famous example of that got lots of media coverage and was Time magazine's invention of the year, even though it was just a piece of speculative design work. And then there's just other random attributes you might have. So is this a mundane example of design research, or is it a participatory project? The point I'm getting at here is there's such a broad spectrum of stuff that we refer to as design research, but it's actually quite hard to access it and to categorize it and to understand if it's the kind of design research that you might be looking for. So that's what my page is about. However, as reviewer 2 says up here, requires a deeper engagement with assumptions and the philosophy of knowledge. Now that's probably just guidance for life, to be honest, but thank you, reviewer 2. And reviewer 1 said, the term design research has been adopted as an umbrella term for various practices, including speculative design, critical design, and design fiction. This is extremely misleading and needs to be reconsidered. Now, obviously we appreciate the reviews, but this was one that I did find confusing, because we said we are using the term design research to refer to these things, and then the reviewer says it's misleading. So I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean. Anyway, we will carry on. Sorry, Dave?
I said you can't win.
You can't win. You can't win. But you can do a dance with a heart. So that's good.
Dancing.
Oh, then the final one of our databases, or our kind of imaginary search engines, was this thing created by our one and only Enrique Encinas. So you can speak about this, Enrique. I will spotlight you, you are spotlighted. Which means,
I am.
Yeah. Which means everyone can hear you.
Yes. So with this idea, it was very much, it was trying to kind of imagine or try to push the boundary in how we actually interact with databases and the expectations we have when we face one. So because usually a database imposes this attitude or demands an attitude of being concrete, especially the databases when we think about them in terms of interacting with an interface, such as searching in Google or an app that presents whatever. There is always an interaction with the database, and that interaction is usually imagined in terms of how concrete can you be in specifying your query, so the database can give you exactly what you want. But with design research, I kind of feel it's more the other way around, and it's more in the sense of, so here is yet another way to deal with the ambiguity of design research, rather than here is how I can eliminate the ambiguity and give you exactly what I want. And that's why I proposed a database in which you search by gradients. So the projects would be incorporated in the database, and the artist or designer or the author of the project would specify certain colors in terms of varieties of understanding design research that adapt to that particular project. And then the database would be smart enough to make sense of all the colors of how all the projects that reside in that database are painted by their authors, and then create sort of gradients that cover different projects, gradients that cover different areas of interest or different artifacts. And then when you want to search in that database, you want to search for particular gradients, for the fringes or for the intersections between understandings of design research. And the database would return those results based on how you are conceptualizing yourself in a very ambiguous way, how those gradients might function. So more what Joe was saying before in his presentation about how it is about learning by doing. So I was interested in what if you actually had to design your query, if you need to make that query. I don't know if I can explain it in that way. But yeah, it was that idea of an intentional act of design that is what gives you the results of that the database wants. Yes. I don't know if that makes much sense, but that was the intention.
It makes sense to me, Enrique. I think the part of the problem or part of the challenge of today is to see if it makes sense to anyone else and offer the opportunity to comment on it. So, if anyone does want to comment on these things.
So, Reviewer 4 said some of the ideas in the paper are abstract, which is a wonderful point of.
There is no space for abstract here.
This is research. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to the next chapter of our tour?
Yeah, let's.
Anybody feel free to chip in, but also remember, if you do have ideas you want to share, either stick them in the chat, which has actually been really nice to see some comments in there already, or if you see any of the post-it notes that aren't yellow, they are actually the links through to the feedback chambers. So feel free to leave stuff in there. But if anybody would like to follow me, I'll take you to the next bit that we did and briefly talk about that, because obviously so I'm heading up to the top of the paper. I'll keep talking, and I think everybody can hear me because I'm spotlighted. But if anybody wants to find me, I'm up in the middle at the top. If you look for a page with lots and lots of lines going over it, that's where you'll find me. So basically, we came up with these 3 database ideas, and they were designed pretty much in the abstract. So we didn't really think about how specific projects. So we didn't think too deeply maybe about how specific projects would fit in there, or at least we didn't include that in our presentation of them. So we decided to do a little bit of thinking about, what are the kind of shared characteristics of existing design research projects, and to explore that a little bit further. So we came up between us with 36 examples of design research projects that had different characteristics. And we did a little bit of that wasn't a very tremendously scientific method, because there isn't one for how do we categorize design research projects, and that's kind of part of the issue we're trying to address here. But between the three of us, we came up with a whole bunch of projects that we identified as design research projects and did a little bit of an analysis on them and looked to see kind of what media they used. And so we found that there's loads of videos and photographs, but relatively little in the way of enactments, for instance, although there are some examples of enacted design research. And there's very little in the way of comics, which maybe is surprising considering that's quite a versatile and easily accessible medium. But we also looked for kind of shared characteristics like whether or not it's a single artifact or a suite of artifacts, whether the design research project had been peer reviewed or mistaken for a real thing, like the James Auger project that Joe mentioned. You know, there are these shared characteristics, and that's fine. And that might be a way that we feed into the, you know, design of this imaginary database of design research. But one of the things that that this kind of process misses, that we think is crucial, is the sort of any sense of the sort of reflexivity or the poetry or the irony and ambiguity that some of these projects kind of are built upon. And so in many ways, this is a kind of fairly perfunctory version, but in some ways it's the best approach we've got for coming up with a database design. So this page reflects that frustration, I think, a little bit. So the other thing we looked at, which actually is this way. Hang on, what's at the bottom of this page? Oh, one of the other things we looked at, if we come down to the bottom, is theory. Sort of design research theory, of which there's quite a lot. But what we tried to do here is sort of represent some of the sort of blending and blurred boundaries of all these theories. There's no unified theory of what constitutes design research at the moment. And one of the things that was picked up on by Nicholas Nova, who I believe is co-leader of the Futures Laboratory with Julian Bleeker. Is that right, Joe?
Yeah.
On Twitter, he said he's amazed by the body of work about speculative design fiction. Let's use that as a byword for design research for the time being, versus the actual production of design fiction. So one of the sort of figureheads of this domain is bemoaning the fact that lots of people are thinking about and talking about design research, but maybe fewer people are actually doing it. And so maybe that's an issue that we could address by doing more of it. And that would certainly help us design a database for categorizing it, more to go on. So from that point on, we got into some of the theory, and we came up with these two primary ways of thinking about this issue. One is that we've expanded on this metaphor of a murmuration, of lots of different ways of seeing, and I would encourage everybody to have a read of that section. I won't labour that because I know we probably want to move on to the other parts of the thing. And then there's also this idea of fluidity, and that, you know, meanings aren't fixed. And I think this is the space where we can embrace some of those things that are missing from the sort of bog standard categories. So this is where we can start to think more about how do we represent and understand poetry and reflexivity and irony. And I think it's maybe a lot of it's encapsulated in this idea that some of the meanings aren't necessarily fixed. And so we tried to represent that in this metaphor of the river estuary and all of these different channels of ideas flowing into each other. But I would also encourage you to have a read through that bit if you're interested in that idea. And then up at the top, we have another sort of representation of a lot of the idea that a lot of design research is about design research, not so much about the doing of it. And I drew this little illustration here, thinking it wouldn't make the cut, but here it is in the final thing. It's the Russian doll reading a paper about design research with, yeah, you get the idea. Anyway, Enrique,
Uroborian.
would you like to talk about the non-soners? Not soners, rather.
Yeah. I mean, was because the richness of the not sonas is very much about looking at the comments and the reflections and because we were a little bit adversarial with our not sonas, no? We didn't try to really make them just speak what we wanted about the paper or the ideas that we put in the thing, but they were kind of working against.
Yeah,
a little bit against.
I think we tried to use them to anticipate some of the things the reviewers said, essentially.
Yeah.
But we were ill prepared for the reviews. But I think it was about speculating about how a database might exist in the real world. It was about rendering this imaginary database to be a little bit more mundane. And so it's already out there and people are using it. And these non-sonas were kind of lenses on that, like ways of looking at our own research, essentially.
Yeah.
And then we also wrote some letters to the database designer as a way of doing the same kind of thing, basically. Looking back on our own research and providing different perspectives, different ways of seeing our own research by sort of taking on these different imagined characters that were writing letters to the supposed author of this database that was going to be built on our recommendations.
So what's your one about? Who is Octopus?
So Octopus 2020 to 2082 is a member of the Secret Society of Design Researchers, which is a mysterious organization that sort of works in the undergrowth to further the aims of design researchers worldwide. And the recommendation that I put that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, but that was my idea and I ran with it. But the thing that I think came out of this letter that was actually interesting for me was actually on the basis of the thing with all the lines showed up that there's a lot of video and photographs and stuff in design research, but relatively little in the way of audio and enactments, things like that. And actually, by highlighting those absences, it might actually serve a useful purpose, which is to say, quite often the things that grab headlines are projects that do something for the first time or do something in a new way, and it's very much anchored in this Marshall McLuhan idea of the medium being the message. If you do something in a new form, it quite often has a new meaning, has a meaning that's exciting, and the novelty is often quite appealing, and will get a project noticed in a way that something in a more traditional format won't. And so particularly if we combine the idea of highlighting gaps with a sort of temporal aspect, then it could help, a database like this could help keep the world of design research kind of moving and keep it dynamic by reminding people that, well, actually, maybe for the last couple of years nobody's done any photography in design research, so maybe that's the medium to go for. So my letter was really just a little general probe in that direction.
I mean, I think it's amazing, right? Just you unpacking it there, the amount of depth that there is even in this one letter. And this one letter is one of 50 ideas and sort of things we put into the pictorial, which in some way maybe it's representative of the thing we're talking about, a very broad topic, but it's also perhaps why reviewers struggled with it a bit, because it was very dense and it didn't, because it was meant to be visual, it didn't explain to people why each thing was there. What I just saw Marketa was talking about a similar experience with your tasting paper. One thing you said is, should the reviewers get invited to gather before they submit their reviews? If they were reviewing gather, then yes. But to be clear, the original version wasn't gather. It was just an image. And after the rejection, we made it into this as a way of kind of coping with the loss. But do you want to, Marketa, given that you're here and you can, do you want to just tell us a little bit about what happened with the tasting paper? I can, if you want to, I can spotlight you. And I think you're muted. But my lip reading's not so good, so it doesn't matter. We can just move on anyway. If you get the sound working, then try in a little bit.
We can also have a chat on the chat, Marketa, about that. If anybody's interested in following up, we can pick that up later if you want. We can't get the sound going. I was just thinking, if there's anybody here from the press, the headline might be disgruntled academics spend an hour in Gathertown complaining about their bad reviews.
Yes, but it can come across that way. But I really truly believe there's been a lot of learning involved in digesting why the thing was treated the way it was, and then building something new from it. I can hear you now, Marketa.
Can you? What about now? Fantastic.
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, well, see, I got it that it wasn't in the Gather format at the time when you submitted the first draft, but wouldn't it be great to explain it to the reviewers like this, like you just did to us? You know, before they write their hateful reviews that are coming from a sheer misunderstanding and frustration that you are doing something that they don't understand.
That's a really good point. And I mean, I think it does, in some way, that gets right to the core of some of the academic traditions, or in particular communities anyway, when it's the idea that you send some work, it gets reviewed anonymously, and then a decision is made with no conversation. That's not great. In most journals is a little bit different. You have a back and forth between reviewers and authors. And I think on this occasion, it would have been great to do that. And it would have been even more great to, yes, use Gather as the medium so we could literally give people a guided tour.
But also, on the other hand, you know, there's some beauty in ambiguity, and sometimes there's a call for an active, readership being an active process. And actually, you know, to explain this letter is rather to defeat the object, because, you know, the meaning is in there. You just got to root for it. And so to have to explain it, you know, almost abolishes the need for art.
Yeah, that's bang on, Dave. And actually, again, is reflective of the thing we're dealing with most design research projects, or at least research through design projects. There is no concrete fundamental outcome. It is inherently subjective in that relationship between the artifact, the account of process, and the subjectivity of the audience or the person looking at it. So that's, even though design research is evidentially useful, it's always subjective, and that was part of the reason we wanted this to be a little bit the same. However, it wasn't received very well. As reviewer 4 said, Enrique, some of this is abstract.
Yeah, but there is also this element of time, no? Like, if you're reviewing, you're doing it basically in your free time. So how much attention can you actually pay to each of the papers? And then you come to this point of, oh, this is kind of abstract. What the hell are they even trying to do? This is nonsense. And then it gets rejected. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely an issue, and I feel that myself. Like, I get asked to review a lot of papers, and I like to try and give them all as much time as they deserve, but inevitably that's not always as much as I can give. But I think in this case, we'd like to give our reviewers the benefit of the doubt that they, you know, did spend the time with it, and that they did, you know, really engage with it. So I think, and I think on that basis, we can probably say that there's something that's slightly wonky with the process, because when we don't want to point at our reviewers as individuals, because, you know, they're doing their best in the same way that we are.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. As well, it's kind of, I'm delighted in a way that we're here, and this is as good as, or a better kind of outlet than what we were planning. It has a different quality to it, and actually wouldn't necessarily be given as much kudos in some academic circles, but in others it actually would be given more. And again, this sort of shines a light on some of the challenges that are brought up when the traditions of art and design schools meet a research culture, and there's occasionally a clash. I think that's another point that we kind of want to highlight. Anyway, should we move on from Octopus 282? I don't know where we should go next. Dave, lead us.
Do we want to have a look at some of the other letters, or should we leave that for people to explore in their own time?
We could have a look at Enrique's letter because it's nice and easy to read.
Yeah, let's do it.
I went full on ambiguity. I mean, because the whole idea of the these gradient databases as, you know, as how do you say, amalgamation? Yeah. So then I thought, if there's very much the same thing you were talking about, that like, and also because it, especially, let me see how can I put this, but it is somehow like an established already understanding within the design research community that ambiguity is a resource. You know, there is papers about it, super well cited stuff about how ambiguity is a very strong ally in projects of doing design research. But the problem is that I'm not sure. Then there seems to be good and bad ambiguity. It's not that suddenly we can use ambiguity, but there seems to be better forms of ambiguity than others. Obviously, because it's also it runs against the idea of research, because research very much tries to show an idea with as much clarity as possible. So ambiguity, in a sense, runs counter to that. But at the same time, when you're doing design, you couldn't design stuff if you weren't able to manage and kind of deal and weaponize ambiguity somehow. So I think that's the super interesting tension that is in design research. And that's why I made this very lousy, I'm not going to call it a poem because it's not, but just a bunch of that kind of open paths to think about the other. Yeah, I don't know if it's, yeah.
I like that term that you just used, weaponizing ambiguity. I mean, it's loaded, right? But it's interesting because I think the implication is that ambiguity is something that occurs naturally, often. And when it occurs naturally, maybe unintentionally, it's not so welcome. But when it's, you know, grabbed and when it's used and deployed and used consciously, it can have great value. And I think that's what we tried to do here. Maybe what's happened in some of the reviews is that they've mistaken some of our weaponized ambiguity for naturally occurring ambiguity.
Yeah,
that's perhaps something we could try and signpost better.
Yeah,
in future. Food for thought.
Yeah, totally.
Let's move down to the last page, and then we can maybe do a little quick whistle-stop tour of some of the hidden corners of the paper, and then people can go their own way. So the last page is a map of the whole thing, which sort of outlines the two ways of seeing the paper. To write, as you can see there, but then there's the other reading line of the paper, which sort of begins on page 1 and ends on page 12, which is the page that we're currently on, and plots a slightly different route through the paper, and obviously that's confusing. So that's why we included this sort of map of, you know, essentially a kind of index or how to read the paper map. Whether it's clear or not, I'd be curious to know what people think. I can make sense of it, but I made it, so is that useful? I don't know, hopefully, but possibly not. And the other thing to say about this page is that we essentially use the opportunity of a last page to describe our method. Now, for those of you who are familiar with traditional scientific writing, you normally start with a bit of a blurb about what you're talking about, and then maybe a hypothesis or two and a research question, and then you put your methods right up front. But because of the nature in which we approached this project, which was to say, fairly experimental, it made sense for us at least to put our methodology at the end.
Oops, sorry, Pinat.
Oh. So as you can see here on the right hand side, there's a paragraph where we sort of explain a little bit about where we got the idea from for the database, and then we conclude with our methodology. And that's not to say that this is a methods paper particularly, but it just felt like that was a logical place to summarize what we did. And maybe that's something that could be useful for design research, because it is quite often the case that you're making it up as you go along, and sometimes the methods only become clear in retrospect, and that was certainly the case here. So that's basically the whistle-stop tour of the paper. Let's go to a really exciting bit, which is the intro, I think, but also a really cool little history of design research. Follow me down this green pipe. Oh, didn't go where I thought it went. Zach, how do we get to the?
If you go back here, if you go in this back icon,
the bit with the Mario Kart, is that down the maze?
If you go in this back icon here now we're in here, it'll take us there.
Okay. There it is.
Super.
Yes. So this bit is a little tour of the project. It's basically a summary of how we got to this. So if you like, it's the kind of about us page, and rather neatly takes the form of a Mario Kart racetrack. And the numbers that you can see dotted around the track correspond to moments in time. So if you think about the racetrack as a sort of metaphor for the passage of time, and if, for instance, you would go into number 1, you can see that in 1962, the Conference on Design Methods essentially kick-started the field of design research. I think we've lost Joe, who knows a lot more about this than I do. But you'll see there's a list there of moments in time, some of which are more consequential than others, but essentially they are a history of how we got to this paper. And Mario Kart. Apply. So the final thing that we can show you is, if you can come back to this at any point by going in a green tube, and then following the maze is also worth doing. Zach, do you want to say anything about the maze?
Oh yeah, so if you follow the maze, basically there's a little Easter egg at the end, and there's a little cheat pipe in the corner if you just can't solve it. But basically, anytime you want to leave the maze, you just have to go through on the back icons. And if you're a little bit confused about the icons as a whole, you can just go back to the very start. So if you click where it says your name in the bottom middle, if you click reset position, you can go back to the tutorial and explain what all the icons do and how they get you around the paper, which if you're a little bit confused might help. But
you should definitely explore the maze, because it's
100%
A, really fun, and B, there is a cool thing at the end of it, which we hope you'll enjoy. For now, I'm going to head back to the main page. So if you want to meet me there, I'll be there in the next minute or so. So I guess a lot of people probably are off exploring, but and apologies if I'm speaking over any conversations that are happening in the main page. I'm just announcing to the whole room. But there's one last thing that we can show you, which is a little bit of a summary of the evolution of the paper in a sort of an alternative pictorial format. So if you follow me into this icon above the abstract, should be completely rewritten. That'll take us. I just realized
you're gonna lose everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Was that, well, I think, yeah, I forgot this was like 10 different rooms. Right, for those of you who are here in this particular chapter, this is a summary of the structure of the paper, or how it came about. And you move from top to bottom, simple as that. Hi, Naomi. I think you're the only one here now. So you follow me down, and it's the story of this getting rejected. Side. But the other thing to flag here, actually, and maybe I'll go here afterwards, is the feedback room, which is a preview on the right there. Maybe we should have turned that into a portal. But that's what the portal room looks like, and we'll go there afterwards. Okay, sorry that was a little bit disjointed, but you can bear with me. So that's the last part of that section. Now we're going to go into the feedback room, and that will conclude the talk. So follow me. Okay, so the last thing that we did on this project was to come up with a few provocations that we think are relevant and interesting. And in this case, the provocation is design is not art, or is it? And there are 3 of these in the paper in 3 different colors. I think one's blue, one's orange, this one's pink. And these are just questions that we would encourage people to have a think about that are relevant. And if you feel so inclined, when you're stood on the Post-it note, maybe you have to stand a little bit closer to the icon here. That camera icon should go black. And if that camera icon goes black, you can press X, and it will take you to a page with a link to a little room where you can leave us feedback. So if anybody wants to do that, please do. That would be great. Or you can give us feedback in the chat. That's also fine. But just want to conclude by saying thanks for following me around. Sorry it was a bit strange at times. But really appreciate the conversation we've had. And if anybody's got any questions, you can find me. I'll be in this thing for a little while. And yeah, thanks for your company for the last hour or so. It's been fun. And thanks again to Uroboros for hosting this crazy experiment. And see you guys around, hopefully.